Good afternoon, everybody. We are live, I believe. So just to welcome you all today, we're here for what I believe will be a very exciting panel event. We're looking at the opportunities from a sustainable digital built environment and really trying to take some of the current trends and topics going around the facilities management and operational built environment phase and kind of bring that into some kind of actionable dialogue. So to do that, we have brought together a very rounded and very different set of panelists. And I'd just like to welcome them all to the session today and also let them run through a very brief introduction to each of them in advance of starting the session today. But if we can just go from left to right, starting with Tom Brooks.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Tom Brooks. I am a client director at Microsoft, and I look after the facilities management sector within our enterprise division.
Perfect, thanks, Tom. Greg.
Afternoon, everybody. Yeah, pleased to be here. Greg Chanter Hall. I work for small consultancy Square Gain, working with lots of authorities, most of the London local authorities, NHS, and sort of big blue chip companies on their commercial FM.
Thanks, Greg. And Paul?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Paul Dodd. I work with an organisation, Scottish Futures Trust, a Scottish government agency, and we support the public sector in the delivery and performance of infrastructure generally, and I look after the infrastructure technology part within Scottish Futures Trust.
Thanks, Paul. Mark?
Good afternoon, everybody. Mark Griffiths. I'm the MD of WMA Consulting, which is my own consultancy business specialising in FM and the workplace for what now the best part of 3 years. Also a member of the technology SIG, got an interest in all things in the built environment and how the digital tools we've got available to us can help us on all the challenges we face sustainably in the future.
Thanks, Mark. And Elliot, yourself.
Hi, yes, hello. My name's Elliot. I'm the Energy Manager for Keele University. Keele is the UK's largest single campus university based in North Staffordshire. We've been doing some fun stuff with future energy networks and future energy technologies as well. So my role here is very much around energy management, leading on some of the net zero aspects, and we've been doing a heck of a lot about digitization as well, so talk about it.
Great, thanks, Elliot. So my name is Gordon Mitchell. I'm going to be host for today, and I sit as chair of the Technology Special Interest Group with the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management. I also have Hazel Bedson with me today, who is going to be supporting, is also part of the Technology Special Interest Group. And really just some basics of how we're looking to engage today is you can see on the screen there's a link to our LinkedIn group where we try and keep abreast of really what's going on in the Institute with that digital technological view. And today is going to be very much a few channels for you to engage in. You've seen all the lovely panelists. They're going to be talking and walking through the various questions and really trying to get under the skin of the opportunity we have in front of us. But we do have obviously the Zoom platform. There's chat in the bottom right, where you can drop questions to either the panelists or to the group. There's also the Q&A part of Zoom, normally in the middle of your application. That's really, if you have any questions, you can post them there and have all the panelists engage with you throughout the session. But we're also going to run a bit of a Menti experience today to try and get some live audience interaction and feedback, which then the panelists can reflect upon. But of course, the Q&A does last throughout the session, and we'll look to bring that to a kind of close and summarize some of the more pertinent questions just to wrap up things at the very end. So to move into today and really to start the conversation flowing, and as I say, please feel free to use any of the channels for engagement as the session goes on. But the first question we're looking at here is very much around the kind of digitization that's needed. So we're looking at clearly net zero ambitions, and we're looking at an absolute war chest of digitization options. But what are the ones that are really going to make the difference? What are the ones that are maybe easy to access, easy first steps on this journey, or easy things to augment to really achieve big impacts and get the C-suite, looking up with attention at the excellent work that we can deliver. So to kind of get an initial thought on this, I'd like to just start with yourself, Mark, if that's okay, and kind of get into the FM view, and then we can unfold it through the different panelist viewpoint. But if you could maybe just kick us off today, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. From my perspective, I think that the key thing there is not to be afraid to embrace the technology. I think that the days of open protocol not being quite as open as perhaps people thought are going or gone. And I had an interesting conversation at a conference I was at last week, and the big focus there was around net zero and what both healthcare and the university sector were doing in terms of trying to get to that point. And I think everyone needs to understand that net zero is not going to go away, and it's going to be a constant challenge for the industry. But I think it's also something we should embrace and something we should be thankful for, because it just gives us as FMs and workplace practitioners the opportunity to articulate even further the value of what we bring and what value we add to organisations. And sensor technology being one. I was talking to somebody last week at that event. They're talking about the price point of a sensor that used to be 150, 200 pounds in a particular area. It's now less than £5. Now that is a huge step change in 4 or 5 years. And this is something that you can roll out in a much simpler way now. The digital platforms that are available that can integrate and give you dashboards on that data with existing systems are much more easier to be a part of. And I think if we can be as open-minded as we can be, and also understand the importance of managing the data that's relevant to us. We're awash with data now in the workplace and the built environment. We as FMs need to embrace the fact that data is available to us, but only use the good quality stuff, not worry about the stuff that may not be relevant. And I talking to a BIM manager from one of the leading construction companies last week. They go to their clients and they say, we want 15 core items that you want to monitor as part of your BIM model that moves into your digital twin that can help you manage your estate more effectively. Some clients go to them with 90 different points that they want to monitor on every individual item or asset component in their building. And when you look at the building, that adds up to a huge amount there. And that technology is much more readily available to us now. I was lead judge this year for the IWFM Technology Award. There is so much that's out there in lots of different sectors, and we can embrace that, deliver that, and use those systems that bolt onto our BMS systems that help us understand the behavioural patterns in our estates and our facilities a lot more to drive the real value of what we do and optimise the property that we do occupy, especially from a sustainability perspective, and focus in on the genuine areas that are going to add much more value to that process. And what we do to continually, it's going to be an iterative process in terms of the sustainability approach and what we need to do. That's we're going to be constantly looking at that. And there are some organisations with some real key targets there that are really going to stretch all of us. But they're only going to. Sorry, Gordon.
Sorry, Mark. Well, I think there's almost a economic aspect that you're highlighting there in terms of that's maybe not about the digitization per se. It's things that have been around for a while, but the accessibility to that's maybe more now. But I think your point as well about just enough, start the journey, make some big changes, and that I guess creates a platform for success going forward. On that point, just to bring yourself in, Tom, we're looking at this affordability, we're looking at this accessibility from your point in Microsoft. what do you see in terms of the digitization needs in the FM space, and can you kind of reply to
Yeah,
that
sure.
other perspective? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from our perspective, the world has digitized much quicker within the last 18 months, as we all know, than it has in the previous probably 10 years. So people and organizations are now doing things which they could have never imagined to do even 18 months ago. So a great example is when the pandemic hit, everyone all of a sudden had to work at home. Actually, all the FM companies that I work with didn't find that a problem. All the core people, they could do that straight away. So in terms of digitization, with the technology is available now. It's actually being able to harness it and use it and understand the right solutions which companies want to buy from you, which is a slightly different nuance that a customer may demand a new FM solution, but are they actually willing to pay for it? So you have to find different ways to build that return on investment, to show and demonstrate whether it's a sustainable initiative, whether it's cleaning your offices better. It doesn't matter. That's what we're seeing around digitization. It's absolutely key to it. Now, sustainability it's a bit of a crunch point I'm finding in the industry at the moment. Now, it's on every board's agenda, but actually, what does it mean in terms of the way their business runs? They know they have to hit. They know they have to hit certain targets. Those targets are very different depending on whichever company you're talking to. So, how does FM help contribute to those, and how do you actually measure that? Because that's the key to it. Is actually the measurement of it, and actually what you do with that.
And that's really quite interesting, that it's almost becoming more outcome kind of orientated, and maybe stepping away from the zeros and ones and getting into something that's more, I guess, achievable or reachable to people, even in the core understanding. I mean, taken in from both of those points, Paul, I don't know, you've obviously got to try and deal with a lot of those different elements as well, and I guess outcomes is something that's got to be part of a government kind of agenda. But do you like to kind of give your opinion on this question?
Yeah, of course. So what a big question. Just digitization in itself, net zero in itself, and the built environment, three huge areas. And to try and simplify it in my mind, if you've got a very simple graph, the vertical being the whole life, investing, designing, constructing, operating, and the vertical being scale. So going from systems to the building to a portfolio and estate and to place. And if you take that as kind of two kind of relational kind of points, we're seeing lots of activity around digitization across the asset life cycle at different scales, which is great. And we're also seeing lots of activity around driving the carbon ambition across that as well, both in terms of scale, moving from assets to place, or systems to place, should I say, as well as the whole life. We obviously support public bodies, look at how they might evolve their digital strategies within facilities management and estate management. And sometimes we talk about going from the boiler to the boardroom in terms of insight, in terms of information, in terms of understanding, and supporting that digitization. So I think the opportunity exists around connections, aligning that whole life approach. For us, a big part of our role is about getting that foundational part right. So working with public bodies and industry around creating, we're currently working on a standard information management plan. So trying to create the conditions for success for effective facilities management, and engaging with facilities managers to understand their needs and where the value proposition is around that. So hopefully that helps to frame it. I think that there's a huge opportunity now to really move both a number of agendas for the right reasons in the right way around digitization and driving that net zero. So hopefully that helps.
No, I mean, I think inevitably what we're talking about is how do you eat the elephant type scenario. Like you say, each of these domains are colossal in their own standalone nature, but when you blend them all into this one connected space, yeah, it's huge. I mean, just kind of coming back to how you started this, Mark. I'm just wondering, you called out IoT as a specific. I wonder if there's any, from a more, the way I see it at the moment is there's a gap between the technological capability and our FM capability. And the tech's, really very good today, but it's not very well leveraged. So you spoke about IoT, but I wonder if there's any kind of more practical aspects that you're seeing, particularly from the recent judging that you've been involved in, that you've seen some eye openers, reimagining almost.
There are some. I think some of them are quite radical. Chatbots on help desks and the like, and that kind of thing was one that we saw. Another one that we saw was in the NHS sector, and that was the eventual winner of the technology award. And their focus there, I think, goes back to the point made just now by Paul about the added value. Is their focus there was trying to save nurses and clinicians time, so they had more time to treat the patient rather than be distracted by what they needed to do to request a task from the help desk and the like, and understand an update on that when they had a whatever kind of service or repair to be fretting about in the healthcare environment. And I think some organisations are now understanding the value of what they deliver in that space and taking a more joined up approach to it. And it's very simple. I'm a great believer that a lot of what can be done to get us to where we need to can be done with some of the tools that are already available to us.
Yeah.
Building management systems, energy management systems and the like. And I'm sure somebody like Tom will be able to tell us exactly what the technology wizards can do in helping us understand that data. And I think a lot of it is just in embracing the fact that we can now join the dots. It's as simple as that, I think. And I think that piece there is going to, it will just help us achieve those very ambitious targets or get closer to them a lot sooner than perhaps we realise. From an engineering perspective, building services engineers have always been concerned about energy management for decades now. Now they have a lot more tools that they can easily pull out of their toolbox to deliver on where they need to get to or get close to it with some of the targets they've got.
It's an interesting point, and as Mark, you just outlined, maybe Tom, do you see a kind of a trend towards a need in the sector for more understanding of the technology or more understanding of the data?
Good question, because they're inextricably linked in the fact that you can buy a sensor, as you say, for 25p. You can put it on a desk or on a wall and you can start monitoring what's happening in that room and people. But actually, it's interpretation of that data and how you use it is the key thing. The biggest barrier we're finding at the moment is actually skilled resources. So data science resources, technology resources, they are in such short supply at the moment that you're having to pay extraordinarily large amounts of money to get those people to work for FM companies, to work for building management companies, and to build that return on investment, it becomes more and more difficult. So the data is absolutely the key to it, but it's interpretation, how you present it to the customer, and also, I've been working with a couple of boards within large FMs recently, and you're really having to prove the ROI before they actually do anything. And actually, once you've proven it, they get it. But to actually get to that proof point is actually very difficult, because it takes a lot of investment. And as we know, FM companies work off small margins, so they've got to really see how they get that return from these investments. So it's kind of a long-winded answer to absolutely technology and data are inextricably linked, I believe.
No, I mean it's a very good point. And on that point, Paul, in terms of, clearly, when you're trying to do what you're trying to do, you need to have those evidencings. You have to have that kind of, proof to it. What I'd like is for Hazel, if you could maybe just load the Menti question, and we'll get the audience opinion on that. But Paul, maybe you could just kind of give us a brief idea of how you qualify what you end up implementing at a national kind of level, program level.
So the area around so just going back to the net zero ambitions. So there are targets there. We're working with public bodies who have even set even more ambitious targets. City of Edinburgh Council 2030. So there is a need to move quickly and at pace to deliver this. This is in a backdrop where there are commercial pressures, and that ROI, which Tom was talking about, is vital in terms of unlocking the investment needed to drive the investment in both skills, technology, and that data insight piece. There's also this really interesting dynamic around achieving our targets, but also making them, which is in the question, sustainable. So my building needs to remain net zero for its life cycle, not at the end of defects or within 3 years. And that performance, the erosion of performance needs to be monitored, and the role of digital in doing that as well. So there really is that spectrum right through the life cycle that we think about. For us, it is about that interoperability, that information management approach that is aligned across systems, buildings, estates, and procurers or sectors potentially. So that is the big opportunity here. If we're writing the rule book or gaining that alignment now, it'll just set us in such a stronger place going forward and into the future as well.
Certainly agree with that. Well, I mean, in terms of question one, that's as you say, it's a meaty number to kick off on. But thanks everyone for your views. Just to kind of wrap question one up and to the audience, for those of you that haven't used Menti before, you can see the URL. You just need to go to that, input the code that's on the screen. You can then rank all 10 of these options. And in essence, as over the next few minutes, every entry into this will change the screen that you're seeing in front of you, and we'll get a rounded opinion from everyone involved into terms of what we feel are the critical pieces of working. We all know we want to get to net zero. We all know, I think now, we need to get to net zero, but how? And I think really from everyone's points, it's about, or what I've heard is an element of that is we need to light up, get a torch on the path going forward to make sure we don't fall off the edge of a cliff. We need that context, we need that awareness, but we also need to upskill. We need to bring more maturity of understanding. There's no point in data sitting in spreadsheets doing nothing for us. It needs to be brought to life and integrated with our operations. But yeah, what my intent would be is just to leave this on the screen for a little while we move into further dialogue. But certainly it's something that we can, I guess, reflect on and play back in the Q&A session. But I think as we can see already, people have started to interface with this. We've got four different users on it, and you can start to see some. I guess BIM and is leading the way, but we will the URL and the code are in the chat. Please feel free. We'll leave question one open. We've only got 2 today. Please leave any comments you might have also in the chat in terms of 10. If you say 10, there's something you feel that's not qualified there, then pop it into the chat window for, or even bring up a question. And what we'll hope to do is reflect that back into the Institute and really understand what's making this work for us all. So Hazel, if you want to just pop off of the Menti board, and we'll let that keep doing what it's doing, and we'll come back to question 2, because although we've got 75 minutes today, I think we're already slightly behind time, which is good when we're only 25 minutes in. But on to question 2, just as that's that's coming up on the screen, we're looking at really in terms of what's already happened, in terms of the successes we've had and the wins that we've seen. What are we seeing in terms of that actual FM strategy that's needed to enable a more sustainable model? And on this one, given your background and the various organizations you've worked with, Greg, I'd like to come to you first, just to kind of, this is your business, this is what you do. What have you found are those kind of usual steps into this type of question space, if that's okay?
Yeah, for sure. No, I'd love to. I think the first thing first is to sort of look back at that question, because that question can be interpreted in a few different ways. So, you know, a more sustainable model, a more sustainable business model, sometimes it's got absolutely nothing to do with environment and social and carbon. You know, we just talk about sustainable finance and those sorts of things, which are obviously important. But I think you're meaning the question there, Gordon, in terms of, you know, real sustainability, how can we really add value and reduce carbon and so on, and linked to that, to sort of demystify, you know, sustainability, I like to sort of simplify things, and really I just think about really not wasting as being the sort of key thing that we're thinking around there, linking to efficiency and energy, water, waste, building a more sort of circular economy. And then also looking for opportunities which may be on new buildings, which then we take forward in terms of sort of making things better. And we'll have heard things like net gain, whether that's around biodiversity, you know, making things better than they were when they get there. And we'll also be familiar, I suspect, with the term of net zero carbon, carbon positive, you know, making it actually a greater contribution than it was before we've been there. And I think when we look back over the years, we've been making big strides in the right direction. And I loved that. I think it was your comment earlier on, Paul, around from boiler to boardroom. We've got a fantastic opportunity right now. You know, the boiler was not on the boardroom agenda 5 years ago, even probably a couple of years ago, but we've seen dramatic shifts, certainly since COP21, which is in 2015. The Paris Agreement came out there. We've seen the recent COP26, where we're now looking at these annual targets, and that wakes people up in terms of, you know, politicians, and also in terms of chief execs, whether they're on the developer side, whether they're on our sort of FM side, because annual targets and annual ratcheting of those targets, that fits within their tenure. You know, something that's 2030, 2040, 2050, that's not within the tenure of any chief exec or politician. So it can be sort of kicked down the path. So I think that sort of timeline is a critical step in terms of moving the FM strategy towards sustainability. Those measures that we've talked about in terms of data and digitalisation leading to data, I think that we've got huge opportunities to use data much better, both from our existing portfolios, looking at where we've got greatest carbon intensity, using EPCs, DECs, linking them with the BMS. We're just starting to do some interesting work with the NHS around backlog maintenance and how that links to carbon, because really there's a sort of a quick win there. You know, if there's a backlog maintenance problem, then chances are that equipment is not particularly efficient, that's got a high carbon intensity. If we can focus on the backlog maintenance program as a sort of priority point within the NHS portfolio, then that's also going to deliver carbon benefits much more quickly than perhaps looking at sort of, you know, tweaking things that are already quite good. I think there's also big steps that we've made in terms of aligning our FM strategy with the whole building strategy, development strategy. So, you know, we've been saying for many years that it's absolutely vital for us as operators of buildings to be getting involved at the early design stages, you know, really REBA 2 onwards at the latest. So I think that there's huge opportunities for us to do more around that, and to link that early engagement into whole life costing and whole life carbon, and what sort of opportunities there are in terms of savings. I can keep talking for a long time on this, Gordon, but I'm conscious you probably want to move on to hear from others.
No, I think it's quite excellent. I mean, it's that, or what I heard from you is we can't big bang it. It needs to be iterative. So, you know, really focusing in on those, like you say, quick wins, and that will be different from organization to organization. the other thing that I thought was really, really rich out of that, Greg, was almost this sort of stakeholder alignment, and getting the right people to understand the transformation needs is almost this foundation that lays a road to success. And you know, on that particular point, Elliot, given that you know, kind of sit on the other side, or have sat on the other side of that dynamic, where you've had an array of stakeholders who've gone through this journey on this massive campus that you have, could you maybe kind of elaborate a little on that side of things, and you know, the critical steps you've seen that have brought the wins, etc.?
Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, firstly, I think absolutely, Greg, what you're saying there is absolutely correct in terms of the sort of higher level parts of our organisations and what's being said at director level. So there are a couple of schemes now that the government's introduced, like the Simplified Energy Carbon Reporting Scheme and the Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme, which force us to have these conversations around sustainability at a director level now, and they have been super important in altering certainly the strategy of the organisation I'm with, and perhaps the carbon reduction commitment would be a better example of that. But that's really got us talking a number of years ago about what we need to do to become more sustainable. And it was around about 5 or 6 years ago that we started the process to implement something which we now call the Smart Energy Network Demonstrator, which is a project which I'm not going to try and explain because there's probably not enough time in the day, never mind enough time in the session that we've got left. But it's really about trying to understand what's happening at a macro level on campus in terms of energy demands, and trying to utilize different software packages and platforms to actually allow us to migrate demands away from those peak times when we're really struggling with energy consumption on campus. So about 5 or 6 years ago, we started looking at this, and as I think probably with most organizations, we knew what we wanted in terms of outputs. We wanted to be able to manage our energy networks more effectively because we are a single campus university. We look after our own energy networks, and it's quite a challenge to do that. But what we found was that we didn't really know, well, we knew what we wanted to get out of it, but we really didn't know how to approach it. And I know earlier on, Mark was sort of mentioning about, you know, how do you actually go about embracing technology? And I think we kind of stepped back and actually said, we're not sure. So this was 5 or 6 years ago, and we actually ended up just engaging with the vendor that we actually ended up selecting in the end. And unfortunately, what we had to do was essentially go to them and say, this is what we want, and we need you to tell us how to go about doing it. And that's been a really successful endeavor overall, the actual project itself. We collect so much data now, it's almost incomprehensible how much data we're collecting from our buildings, both existing legacy buildings and also the new stuff that we're building as well. But what we're managing to get out of this is a real world smart system whereby we can move this data around. When I say it was a little bit unfortunate that we had to be led by the vendor, what that meant is that the outputs that we got are a little bit not exactly what we necessarily wanted, because we weren't, well, although we knew what we wanted to get out of it, we weren't quite sure how that would go about being delivered. So that's been a real challenge for us. But yeah, I think probably we could say it's quite a success as well, because we do have this sort of sector leading system now where we can truly move energy demand around on campus, and that has delivered even more over the last year or two. We've actually just switched on essentially a renewable energy park, which is on campus, which is 2 wind turbines, 15,000 solar panels. Now, these are systems that we're seeing elsewhere in the country, of course, but what I will tell you is that the actual business case of that system was a little bit touch and go at times, because obviously quite a lot of expense to actually get those systems up and running. What we really found in terms of the value from our smart energy system was that we were able to use the data that was coming back to actually justify all of the additional benefits that we could get out of running a renewable energy system. So it's not just that it's providing us with renewable energy when the wind's blowing or the sun's shining. We're actually able to use the battery system, which is on board it as well, to make sure that it's utilizing or providing us with this renewable electricity at the times when it's most effective to us. So we're able to, for example, we're able to preheat the electricity, so the hot water systems on campus, utilizing renewable electricity, because we've got the ability to move that demand around and through.
So, I mean, I wonder, given that, just to keep us on track of time, if we could jump to question 3, I do have a follow-up question for you, Elliot, on that regard, but it more comes into this space. Is clearly energy data, is clearly, the obvious one, but I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of a feel for, you've gone through this data exploration, you've gone through supplier engagement and maturing of that kind of whole supply chain model to actually deliver what you're aspiring towards. But what's the kind of data that you've actually found in what you do that has made a difference, has maybe even told you stuff you didn't expect,
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, in terms of data, like I suggested already, the amount of data that we're getting back now is eye-watering. We have effectively just one main electricity meter for the whole of campus, which is what we actually pay the bill against. But actually, when you're on campus, before we even started our smart energy system, we had about 3,000 sub-meters. Would hazard that we're probably well beyond 4 figures now, because we're actually measuring individual ways off distribution boards, and actually in some cases specific pieces of equipment whereby we know, for example, a chiller that might utilize a lot of electricity, actually understanding at a macro level what it's using and when it's using it can help us to really manage electricity on campus. But it goes beyond that as well, in terms of when we're talking about net zero. I know we're talking a lot about energy, and as an energy manager, that's obviously my primary focus. But there are other aspects of this that we're looking at that we can consider as well. So we look at some of the BEMS software packages that we have. We do tend to have more than one, of course, as many sites will do. But actually what we found is that the digitization of those units and making those, the software and the data within them open protocol, has really helped us, because we've managed to install additional systems which sit above our BEMS and actually take a look at the data that sits within there and utilize AI and machine learning to understand when we're having mechanical problems on site before we've actually even found them. We installed those systems 3 or 4 years ago, and I'll be honest with you, it was a little bit of a headache installing them. Anybody that's within this sort of sector will understand that you've got different names for, let's say, a temperature sensor within a building, and it doesn't have any sort of association with another building. And getting these systems to actually understand what those individual points are doing was quite a headache for us. But we're seeing some massive gains out of the machine learning aspect of this, whereby we can get back a report that says, in building X, you've got a pump which is about to fail, or you've got a valve which is open all the time and it's causing you to lose energy. Now, our BEMS tech is fantastic, but he could spend the rest of his life looking for some of these things and never find them, because there's just so much data there. So in terms of, what we find to be useful, the question is a really difficult one, because there's just so much. And it's important to note as well, I think, that quite often the data that we've got, we haven't even identified fully yet how it can be used. And there are other benefits that we're just not seeing just yet. So as an example of that, quite fortunately, over the last year or so, we've been installing a lot of room level control. So we can actually control heating within a room and lighting based on whether somebody's in there. But what that has actually allowed us to do over the last 6 months or so is to implement CO2 sensors, which has helped us to manage air quality at a really important time for us, obviously, with the pandemic as it is. So that's actually opened up an opportunity for us that we didn't expect was there, and that is a really important thing, I think, to note.
And I think that's that's one of those, we look at data in this kind of singular stream context because we're going to record CO2 or energy or whatever the motivator might be. But inside, the world that we live in isn't a disconnected stream of individual data. It's one world, and it all connects in that whole life context and understanding the secret. I certainly have never done a single project that a surprise hasn't come out of the data. And on kind of that point, and thanks for the sort of bringing that to life, Elliot. It sounds fantastic campus end to end now. But Mark, just kind of wanting to bring you in a little bit on this FM data piece. I mean, Elliot's clearly been there in the trenches, got the learns, and is now starting to see the efforts and the value of this endeavor. Tom and Paul both spoke earlier on about this kind of, need to bring the ROI, and once it's there and understood, it's a no-brainer. But just could you maybe just explore, because both from your lead judge role, but this more broad FM sector point of view, what's the kind of data you're seeing that's making a difference?
Yeah, I think energy is going to be a core component of that, and I think I was at an event yesterday where somebody from the Government Property Agency was talking about this, and they were saying one of the big focuses they've got at the moment is as much electrification as possible demand, because that's easier to regulate. And when you think about it, that's very simplistic, but it's something you take for granted until you're actually faced with the question and realise what they're trying to achieve. And I think it's space optimization. I think is another one that's coming into the fore, both in the university sector and healthcare sector, and they're quite unique sets of estates, as well as in the commercial office arena. So I think understanding how the facility or the assets are used, I think and that data now is being utilised a lot more by a lot more people. And I think that along with some of the softer elements such as transport, where you've got a big estate and a big a big portfolio to look after, where your universities, we know that they have a big transport demand. How do you measure that carbon when you're moving forward, and the tools around that? Healthcare is another one that's really focusing in those areas. I think those are those behavioural change pieces are going to be the key ones, I think, moving forward. I know Bureau Happold have done some really interesting work in the university sector, and they're modelling using live data, the flow of students through a university campus and what that looks and feels like, and how you can, both from a health perspective in terms of pandemic and what's happening in the post-COVID world, how they can regulate usage, and how they can think ahead and be more proactive about how they optimise the space and the use of that, as well as what they can do for their sustainability and the carbon management, especially, because getting down to that net zero pace is going to need a lot of that high quality data to be pushed and challenged and revisited and refined and polished, and understanding more and more about what you do and how you do it.
No, I mean, it's so changeable, isn't it? There's just so much kind of, and that's, again, as you said earlier on, it's how do you eat the elephant territory. Nobody's practically able to kind of go through all of this in one massive stride. Elliot, do you want to just kind of respond to some of what Mark's raised there from your?
Absolutely, yeah. I think you just hit the nail on the head, I think, in many ways. When you're talking about room utilisation, I think is such an important piece. We've talked already about new buildings and making sure that the design process is there to make them zero carbon. But the reality is that the most low carbon thing you can do is not build the building at all. Now, one of the successes that we've had in the last couple of years, I guess, really, is that we've realised that the data that we had within the energy management team had a great deal of value to our space manager, so that actually we could understand how well our spaces were being utilised and get the very best out of them. We probably hadn't realised that we were collecting room utilisation data from our PIR sensors, which are connected to our BEMS, but what we've managed to do now is to start exporting that data to the space manager, so that rather than her sending around teams of people to do these surveys to find out what rooms are being utilised and when, we actually found out that we had that already. And I think that's probably a really good thing, hopefully, to take away from this, is that there's probably already a number of data streams within your organisations that exist already that perhaps we're not utilising well enough. Now, I can obviously speak for the energy management side of things, and your energy management teams are probably sitting on a great deal of data that we might not be utilising as well as perhaps we could be.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and there is certainly power in it. And like you said, even with the new emerging areas, you can't start instantly understanding it immediately. You need to collect this data to really start to see the power that's contained there within, I guess. And Paul, I mean, obviously, I'm guessing there's a few bits of data that go past your desk. But any kind of thoughts you have on this question?
Just to align with the comments made, really. By coincidence, we are doing a what's called a CivTech challenge with industry at the moment, and the premise of that really is understanding utilization. So very much what Elliot and Mark were talking about there. And it's only when we know how our buildings are being used can we then make decisions around design and operation, etc. There's some really nice examples coming out of that around identifying capacity. So if a school does have a swimming pool, for example, very energy hungry space within the building, does the next school to be built in the vicinity need a pool, or is there capacity in the place to solve that? So there could be really big interventions with that new insight, and that's again, this utilization being a key data thread that we're exploring as well. So nice to see it's appearing in other areas as well.
Awesome. I mean, I'm assuming just to kind of bring it around to yourself, Tom. You probably don't see any data in your day-to-day. No, I'm just joking. Do you want to give us some kind of? I mean, I'm guessing in what you do, and particularly the broad array of the sector you work with, you'll have some interesting views on this one as well. I'm guessing. With mute, if you just pop off mute.
Sorry, old school mistake. Yeah, it's actually the point around space optimization I just wanted to pick up. So this is a huge challenge to FM companies going forward, because ultimately a lot of what they did involves people going to offices or using spaces. And if those spaces aren't used in the same way they were used before, they didn't have the occupancy, they're getting challenged in terms of why are we still paying for the same level of cleaning, for facilities management on that particular space. So it's a real industry challenge that we have at the moment. And one thing as well to bring in here is the impact of hybrid work and how this actually impacts people's carbon footprints and net zero plans. Because if people aren't traveling as much to offices, if people aren't using car parking spaces, is how do you measure that, attribute that, plan your spaces around that to make people use them most effectively? But also when you're running hybrid meetings, how do you make those meetings inclusive for everybody, so people don't feel like they have to travel to a meeting to be part of it? And so we're doing tons of work and building AI into a whole bunch of our solutions and products to make that the most inclusive experience possible, because we see the future as hybrid working. We don't see the future as going back to office. So what this means for us as an industry is how do we design our spaces moving forward to design them for the most effective type of work you can do together as a company, as an organization, and to really drive the most benefits there. So that was one point. Also, just popping back to the point about Elliot made around smart campuses. So we did a piece of work probably about 5-6 years ago now. It's called 88 Acres. And we redesigned all our campuses within our Redmond campus over in the US. So we did exactly what Elliot did, looked at all the sensors, looked at all the buildings, and have saved millions and millions of dollars by running things more effectively. But also what this has changed as well is not only, we do predictive maintenance and things like that, but also route planning around those campuses. So when you've got 125 buildings, people need to travel between buildings. So yes, we use electric buses, but actually why do we have two teams who are actually working together in two buildings half a mile apart? Why do we put them together? So we redesigned teams in the way people work. So if our facilities guys could actually be able to manage the buildings in a better way and manage our teams in a much better way. It's all online as well. So you can just search for 88 Acres Microsoft. All the case studies are online as well, which are really interesting reads.
Well, that's good. And what we'll maybe do is try and just capture some of these things and get some of those helpful links, because there is an awful lot of excellent activity already out there, and there's no point to reinvent the wheel. Just to get I do want to move on to the last question, but just to get a final comment from Mark, and then Greg, just so everyone's had a say on this. But Mark, if you could maybe go first.
Yeah, thank you. I think the other thing to remember in all of this, the UK Green Building Council publishing stats a little while ago, and I think the built environment sector is I'm sure Greg will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right in saying it's responsible for something like 40% of UK emissions, and half of those roughly are operational emissions. So that, combined with the fact that 80% of the current building stock in the UK will still be in use in 2050, shows that for us to understand the data we've got available to us now in existing buildings, and understand that baseline that we've got, and use those tools to develop where we go is going to be crucial. And I think the other thing that really matters is there's some very smart people out there now that can handle this data, but there's also some very smart and experienced people that have got a good understanding of the FM and the services it delivers, and the impact of those not functioning correctly. And we need to find a way to join the dots there between those two different people that are sitting in the FM space to get that to flow a lot better, because then I think much more smarter and agile decisions will tend to be made.
So it's hybrid working and hybrid operations is what you're basically saying.
Yeah.
We need to embrace in this next wave of FM. I mean, thanks, Mark. Just to close out on this question, Greg, you kind of opened up this whole usable data landscape in terms of that strategy, but in terms of, actual success, maybe Hazel, just while Greg's providing this answer, if you could maybe go to the second of the Menti questions. And again, for the audience, if you go to the URL, put the code in, you can, as Greg's talking, you can see the outcomes of the second question we have on this kind of what data makes a difference. But Greg, if you could maybe just sort of get into, almost the other side of the same coin you mentioned earlier on for us.
No, absolutely right. All the data is useful as long as basically we're not sort of losing the sort of wood for the trees, I guess. So I think the data we're gathering in terms of existing performance data and how we actually using that to improve the performance, but also to sort of feed that back into others. So I think we've talked a bit about the data that we use, and we've talked a little bit about how we use the data to communicate with others. And that could be, new buildings, or it could be back up to the boardroom in terms of investment decisions within the same estate. So I think something I've seen work really well, a couple of councils that we work with do it, and also the NHS do it in terms of we've linking this into the business case. So I think the key recommendation of what's worked well for NHS and those councils is start now, do something small, basically learn from it quickly, and then build it up from there. So the NHS have actually even got a business model on this. They'll pilot something from their R&D when they move the R&D into the application. They'll do something once, they'll do it on three sites, they'll do it on 7 sites, they'll do it everywhere. So that kind of sort of build up works very, very well. It minimizes risk. It gives the C-suite the confidence to basically do more. And I think that we're talking about that sort of model being a really quick way of doing things, because I think in the built environment, we're not always the quickest to react. And there's good reasons for that. The buildings take a long time to build. You design, you build them, and then we operate them, and we learn, maybe not as quick as we could do. So I think that learning fast is one thing. And then just one other thing that we haven't talked about too much today in terms of data, and basically how that's moving forward in terms of achieving net zero carbon. We've got to remember the embodied carbon and materials as part of that whole life picture. It's really important. And I think, as Mark says, the built environment is built. We're only refreshing 1% of buildings per year in the UK. So most of those buildings that we've got in 2050, and that's the backstop date to achieve net zero carbon. We want to do it as soon as we possibly can do. A lot of organisations have got targets around 2040, even 2030. One council we're working with has even got a 2025 target, but we've got to include the whole life carbon, including all the embodied energy, and gather data on that. And obviously all of the life cycle replacements that we do throughout the building's whole lifetime period, those replacements have also got embodied carbon as well as operational carbon. So using that information as early as we can and linking that and communicating it back into the supply chain. We talked a bit about sort of stakeholders earlier on. We need to basically feed that information back, whether it's through sort of client briefs, whether we as the FM provider are the procuring authority. How are we telling the supply chain exactly what we want? The fact that we're really valuing carbon in our procurement decisions and sort of stimulating them to do more. You know, almost all the innovation that we can get as we move forward on net zero and wider sustainability comes from the supply chain. So they will invest if they see the business case. So I just think that's one other thing that's worth mentioning.
No, that's excellent again. Thanks, Greg. I mean, there's obviously this sustainability focus, this energy focus that this webinar's around, but what's kind of jumped out to me, certainly from the various conversations thus far, is this maybe place and space performance as well as utilization. Are these kind of common themes from everyone's conversation that maybe this is, you know, why we're kind of motivated to move into this space, but if we do it in this more holistic whole life methodology, then we have this opportunity to really target efficiencies of our buildings, you know, that means that the energy is actually, you know, isn't needed because we're not in the space, or, you know, it's the whole kind of thing starting to really learn and augment with us to make this more easy and more achievable. So we've got some feedback on the final Menti question of today. Interesting that, and I do see this as a trend, and I can already say that the Institute's already looking at next year being focused on these kind of open, interoperable ecosystems. You know, how do we do it? Do we do it alone, or do we do it together? It's a question with an answer. I think this brief ranking question here is kind of showing that maybe together we're better equipped at achieving the objectives that we have. Okay, Hazel, if you want to maybe jump back to the presentation, we'll certainly feed back the outcome of the slides, but it was something we just wanted to really bring the audience more into the experience today, because you are the answer as much as we are. The Q&As are still open. We've got a couple that we'll certainly walk through, but really to lift the lid on all of this, and I'd like to come to Tom, yourself first, with your role with Microsoft. That kind of, I know the tech's great just now, but in that kind of aspiring, you know, that kind of crystal ball space, can you give us maybe some of your thoughts on the art of the possible, and maybe what do we have once we know how to work with this data? What can we get excited about coming next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is a crystal ball kind of question. But what point I'd like to bring out here is actually, you know, as you say, that the technology is here now. We can do lots of things, digital twins, modeling, all that kind of stuff is here now. What it comes down to really from our perspective is people, processes, and actually your imagination about what you want to do, what you want to achieve. And we're seeing more and more people thinking about existing problems in different ways. Call it the Uberization of the FM industry. But if you started again now, knowing what we know, knowing the targets we have to hit around sustainability, would you approach it in the same way? Because I don't believe lots of people are. Lots of people need to rethink about it in a different way. So in terms of other things which are playing a part in the future is the measurement of this whole thing. So, you know, recently we released a product called Sustainability Cloud, which is an open data platform to be able to record reports, do goal settings, do actions on your sustainability goals as a business, whether it's within FM, whether it is within what you produce. But the whole premise behind it is this is setting the future for where we want to go as a global society, for us to be able to do better things together as an overall society. So it's you know, we're very much just the beginning of this journey. We recognize the fact there's lots that we can do as an organization, but also as a collective, there's lots of things that we can do better globally. But from a technology art of the possible, there is so much coming down the line which I don't know about yet, but it's fair to say that there's a lot more machine learning, a lot more AI infused solutions being produced out there, all of which, you know, our philosophy is to make it open to everybody. So not just keep closed ecosystems, but to make sure that groups of people and groups of companies can work together to solve this problem.
Cool. I mean, I love the global society kind of viewpoint. I certainly am a big advocate of that thinking as well. I don't really see it being practically done any other way. And certainly within the Institute's Technology Special Interest Group, that's something we absolutely want to bring to all of the membership in 2022, is let's get under the skin of AI, ML, you know, whatever these tools and techniques might be, and bring them to life a little bit for all of you to kind of get a bit more of a touchy-feely experience with it, and, you know, I guess make it more accessible again. To kind of just I do want to give a little time for some of the Q&As that have come in either through the console or through the chat, but coming at this from maybe not so much necessarily about particular bits of endpoint technology, but more the art of the possible from yourself, Paul, that maybe how do you create a landscape that can not only encourage and embrace these technologies, but also maybe provide, as you say, that solid foundation so that everyone doesn't end up going off in their own direction?
Yeah, well, a lot of our work is trying to align demand in a way that remains open, supports interoperability, and is kind of needs-led in a way, and themes that everybody else has mentioned. And we're doing that through common approaches to information handover, looking at the FM strategies across authorities and how we can share learning and collaborate that learning. So that for me is a key opportunity and challenge, understanding legacy systems and how we embrace, review, and develop them as well. I think probably my point here as well, just to flag, is going back to the why, and what do we need to know for that why in some ways. And there seems to be a real rich conversation industry around innovating in that space, around and using the technology to do that. One of the areas we've been developing is with partners is a UK national metrics library. So really just putting all the types of metrics where you might measure performance in one place, again, just as a resource, not as a methodology, but kind of really testing the purpose, the need, where's the value in it as well. I think that'll be a key part to the conversation, which I think Tom touched on as well.
I mean, I think we're all relatively comfortable with the vision statement. Very much, I think, what you've all been talking about, and thanks for that, Paul. Some of these pieces are, how do we start this journey? How do we go on this journey? How do we know what this journey needs to look like? I think we all know where we want to end up, but that's not going to happen in the next 12 months. That's for absolutely certain. Cool. I mean, that's been tremendous, everyone. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation myself, and covered quite a broad array of areas. I just want to give the next 10 minutes towards both some of the already posted questions, and if there's any others that the audience would like to put to our panel today. But we've got Denise Hughes, who's stated, with all the data resources of assets, what's a good way to have this manageable for facility managers, operations directors? So I guess this is really asking about what's a sensible way to start an information model. So does anyone from an FM operations director viewpoint want to take on that question from Denise? I can certainly venture forward with my own thoughts, but I don't know, Mark. You've certainly had. I'm picking on you here, but exposure in this regard.
I mean, before I started my own consultancy, or as I sometimes put it, when I had a proper job, I was an ops director for a large FM provider, and I think it's sifting the good quality data from some of the data that isn't relevant to you. And I think you need to understand what strategically you're trying to drive, whether you're delivering that for your customer or whether you are the end user. And I think what some service providers will get lost in the fog of is their own measure of value rather than realizing what their client wants, because every client will want something subtly different. If you're working with the NHS, which I've done a lot of in the past, that their core business is making sure that the outcomes of their patients are as good as possible and that their turnaround time in hospital is minimised and they go out of there in a lot better state than they arrived. It's very crude, but that's where they are. The university sector, the student experience, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, I'm sure Elliot has seen this wave of change in that sector, is another one there. And if you understand that, then the data that is available to you, I would suggest you should be able to sift. I think moving forward in more modern buildings, I think digital twins and the importance of those in the future, with everything we have to do, where you'll be able to model what can happen, especially from a sustainability perspective, post-COP and all the other iterations of COP that they're going to come down the track, as well as adding genuine value to the FM function that are going to be key, and that will be, I'm sure, mandated in the future even more so than it has been in the past.
I think it's good points, and it's even going back to what Elliot said earlier on, around you might actually be sitting on a load of useful data as well. I don't know, Elliot, if you want to kind of come in on that question from Denise and just build on what you were mentioning earlier on as well.
Well, in terms of the question from Denise, I'd also like to know how people are managing that, because the reality is there's so much data coming in, and actually trying to format it in such a way that the operations directors where we are can actually understand the trends that are within that, etc., is a real challenge for us as well, because the last thing you want to do is for them to lose confidence in the data that you've got, because you might have provided them with something that perhaps isn't as accurate as we would like it to be. But yeah, that's a tricky bit, I think, really, isn't it?
I mean, I don't think there's any prescribed right or wrong way for this. I mean, I think even jumping, and I will come back to Chris Jeffers' question in a second, but jumping to Connor Shaw's point, I think the real answer is something like an ontology that can be drawn down as and where your needs kind of align, I guess. Creating such a thing is not an easy affair at all, but we need to make this not ambiguous. We need to make it unified and standardized. We need to make it accessible. We need to make it trustworthy, and that's not something, again, that's done overnight. But just to close out on this question, because I do want to cover one more before the end of the session, and we're running very close to the end. But Greg, do you want to just venture in with a quick response to this question from Anise?
Yeah, absolutely. Just thinking really simply about it, you either think deep or you think broad, because you can't do everything all at once. So basically, it's sort of quite useful to sort of start broad, identify the priorities, whether that's sort of for one building or whether it's basically portfolio wide. Look at the current performance, look at the trend analysis, and then basically work out your prioritized plan based on that. And that could be carbon intensity, that could be performance. I think that was what I would recommend. Don't spread yourself too thinly, because you won't be able to do everything. And I said it earlier on, but start small, think big. Start small, prove the business case, and then you can do more. You just need to focus on the areas where it makes the most sense first. I mean, there's things, clarity of data, collaboration with others, don't learn things again. That's completely inefficient. And then the quality of data, we can't be sustainable with poor quality data. So, digitization is a good way to get that high quality data in an efficient manner.
Awesome. We've got a flurry of questions coming in now. What I'd like to do is, there's a great one from Connor Shaw around that life cycle thinking and having to balance the kind of demand side, parent or client kind of organizations. And then Jeff's also got in with really sort of bringing this to some demonstrable life. And I think these are things that the technology SIG will absolutely look to not only bring a comment to both of you, but probably bring something on the back of this session into something that we'll publish. But just to as the last question for today, and we've only got a couple of minutes, but Chris Jeffers has asked about really, I guess, probably the elephant in the room is, how do we upskill ourselves? We know what we're trying to do, we know the tools are there to help us do it, but there's a gap. Europe's quoted at 1% adoption of smart stock, and Europe's probably the most mature continent on earth. Mark, I don't know whether you want to.
Yeah, I mean, me and Chris have spoken about this in the past as well. But yeah, from my perspective, I think the industry, kind of answering Chris's question, is looking at the professional standards, what constitutes the elements of in training and the accreditation for FMs. And Gordon, you've been heavily involved in that recently, in some of the stuff that IWFM are publishing, and I know RICS are also in the FM sector looking at that. I think service providers also will be, some are already doing it, others will also be looking at how they upskill their existing staff. And going back to the point I made earlier, I think that is as relevant as it is the importance of people joining FM as early in their career and making it as a career of choice, rather than historically it's been one of default for some people. They may have entered the sector from an engineering or a sub-services perspective and kind of fallen and developed into management over time. I think that there are so many more tangible skills that are out there now that people will always have their specialisms, but that will inevitably follow, because there is such a demand for talent retention now. It's the only way that the FM sector is going to face up to what it needs to face up to. And it's the same in lots of other sectors. Construction facing the same challenges. The IT technology space is facing the same challenges. And there's lots of different aspirations for people that are now new to the workforce as well. And I think by upskilling those that are currently in place, bringing their skills, and reverse mentoring is always a good way of doing that. I think that will be a good way of getting that development to continue. I think it's happening at the entry point to the industry, and I think it's equally as important for those that have been in their roles for some time and refreshing their skills and knowledge, which is always crucial in any industry, I would say.
Yeah, it's a hell of a challenge, but as we said on the title of this session, if we meet that challenge head on, it's one massive opportunity, and one that I think the world will be massively thankful to us to embrace. Okay, I mean, we've come to the end of the session for today. I'd like to we need to walk through a couple of final slides, but just to really thank all the panelists. I think it's been a hugely engaging and insightful session. I think it's something that, you know, we will absolutely look to build on. We're already looking at ecosystems. We're already looking at digital twins. This topic is not going away, and these various viewpoints that we've all heard today all need to play a part in us having a national and holistic way to embrace this opportunity. And as I said earlier, I think if we do, the upshot of that are happier, healthier, better experienced places and spaces, and what's not to like about that. So hopefully everyone has enjoyed the session. You can see the CPD number on the screen for today's event. As I say, the Technology Special Interest Group is aiming to do a lot more of these sessions. And of course, you've got the Insights Hub on the IWFM website, which has got a huge repository of information, some that the Technology SIGs helped to shape, some the sustainability, workplace, so on and so forth. So please dive into there and use the search and try and find those things that will help you to get to the C-suite and start to tell our value proposition story. And I think this is the last slide, just to highlight that the various podcasts that have happened, sometimes easier to consume the information come out of these types of podcasts, and certainly again, another channel of rich information. The whole institute's really geared up to how do we help you build the bridges to the journey that you need to take, and if we can help in doing that, then we help you to help us all. So that's an opportunity that's a great one for us all to be involved in the technology special interest group here. So finally, again, just to thank the panelists, thank Hazel for supporting today, and the Institute and the technology support we've had. And yeah, thank all of you, most importantly, for attending. Speak to you all soon, and happy sustainable hunting.